The vice is not in requiring photo identification. The vice is in requiring photo identification that people don't have and have a hard time getting.
The bitter partisan debate surrounding Pennsylvania's voter ID law has reached a boiling point now. Here's the background on it. Pennsylvania's voter ID law requires voters to show a specific state-issued photo ID card. That law was challenged. It was upheld and then appealed to the Supreme Court. Well, this week, another legal challenge to that law will go back before the same judge who initially upheld it. And here to discuss it with us now is Pennsylvania State Senator Daylin Leach. State Senator, thank you very much for joining us.
Good to be with you, Doug.
Tell us a little bit about what kind of an ID we're talking about specifically, like a driver's license, correct?
Well, yeah, a driver's license or a senior citizen facility would give you an ID if they had an expiration date. A student ID for an in-state school if it had an expiration date. There are a few IDs that would count. But keep in mind, the reason this law was passed is because there are a number of people, easily identified demographic groups that don't tend to have IDs. They don't tend to have driver's licenses. They tend to be people who don't drive, people who are poor, people who live in the inner cities, students who are transient, and elderly people, all groups that tend to vote Democratic in very large numbers, which is why this law was passed originally. There is no voter fraud of the type that this sort of ID would address. This is about stopping people from voting, which is why it's being passed in a number of states, all of which are controlled by Republicans in an effort to disenfranchise Democratic voters.
State Senator Leach, it defies logic that people don't have these kinds of IDs in the sense that you need one to get into any government building nowadays. You can't get into an airport or ride a plane these days without some kind of an ID, a passport, whatever. How many people are you talking about in Pennsylvania?
Well, the Brennan Center did a study. They said about 11%. Judge Simpson, who ruled in favor of the Republicans in the lower court, even he found up to 9% of Pennsylvanians don't have these IDs. Keep in mind that poor people, very elderly people, they don't often fly places, so they don't have passports. Typically, the average person, the ID that they have is a driver's license. But if you don't drive, either you've never driven or you haven't driven for many years, you tend not to have a current driver's license, which costs money to get. And so what we find is the state at one point admitted about 758,000 Pennsylvanians, we actually think it's higher, do not have any sort of ID that would be acceptable under this voter ID law. Keep in mind, this is to solve a problem that the state itself, in a stipulation filed before the court, admitted they can't find a single case, not one, of the sort of voter fraud that this ID system would address.
All right, joining us in the conversation right now is House Speaker Mike Turzai of Pennsylvania, a Republican. Mike, do you buy those statistics that these many people do not have such an ID form?
No, I do not. Keep in mind that this legislation, which has bipartisan support throughout the state and actually throughout the nation, is really just about presenting a voter identification, which you do when you're buying Sudafed at a drugstore or when you're going to a place to buy beer or if you're going into a gym or if you're going into an airport. It's a common sense provision that has been upheld by the United States Supreme Court in dealing with the state of Indiana's voter identification card in 2006. And Justice Stevens specifically said that we had a right to safeguard voter confidence. And that's why the vast majority of citizens in Pennsylvania and across this country think that it's a common sense tool. And to make sure that each and every vote, one person, one vote, that's the foundation of democracy, right? That no single vote is diluted, because we want to make sure that every single citizen's vote actually counts.
How bad a problem is voter fraud in Pennsylvania?
Yes, if I might. In May of 2009, a 6-month FBI investigation led to forgery and election fraud charges against 7 Pittsburgh area employees. They all received probation. They pled guilty. In Philadelphia, there were submissions of 8,000 voter registration forms fraudulent. And why would they be getting fraudulent forms? If you submit those fraudulent forms and they actually go through, and then somebody comes to vote and you don't have voter identification, you can say you're one of those individuals that put down those fraudulent voter registration forms.
Senator,
if you have
Senator
voter
Leach,
identification, that takes it away, that opportunity.
Senator Leach, 8,000 fraudulent
there
voter
were
forms? That's
significant-
troublesome.
If I can
And that's from
respond, first of
Philadelphia
all,
alone.
if I can respond, first of all, when Mr. Turzai says this was bipartisan, I don't know what he's talking about. Every single senator and every single representative of the Democratic Party in the House and Senate voted against this bill. This is not bipartisan by any stretch of the imagination. This is specifically partisan. When he talks about 8,000 people, and we hear about dead people registered to vote and illegal immigrants, none of these are voter ID issues. Keep in mind why none of these would be illegally registering someone would not be solved by a voter ID. Keep in mind why voter ID never happens. This is a crime. It is 5 years in prison if you're caught. It is the easiest crime to get caught because you have to know someone's registered to vote if you want to impersonate them. You have to know they haven't already voted that day and that none of the 6 or 7 people there who are there from the neighborhood every single election recognize that you're not that person. If you're wrong about that, you go to jail for 5 years. And what do you get? You don't get anything. You don't get any money. What you get is one lousy vote in an election that's likely to be decided by thousands or millions of votes, which is why the Brennan Center, the Bush Justice Department, the National Association of Republican Lawyers have all studied this and could not find one single case in Pennsylvania of this fraud, which is why the governor admitted that.
Either one of you, we got 20 seconds left. Is there a provision under the law in Pennsylvania that would allow those people who do not have those IDs to get to a DMV or some other facility to get one?
Yes, let's be clear. It is the constitutionality of the statute has been upheld by both the United States Supreme Court in a previous decision and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. The fact of the matter is there are various measures to be able to get an appropriate photo identification, and you get it for free. The Baker-Carter Commission recommended just that.
That is inaccurate. Just in case you care, that is inaccurate.
That is completely
We got to go, guys.
By the
We're
Supreme
flat out of
Court.
time. We'll continue the discussion some other day. Well, we asked, and you answered, what you have to say about the president not speaking with world leaders at this week's UN General Assembly. I'll share some of your Twitter responses when we come right back.